Hello, everyone. I'm Steven.
And I'm Spencer. Welcome to Ragnarokast, your podcast for all things marketing and MarTech.
Hi there. I'm Spencer, and welcome to our podcast. We also have Steven here.
Whoa. Yes, we do. We've got Steven here.
Hi, Steven.
What's up, podcast listeners? Listen, I am using this as a vehicle to become a co-host on a much cooler podcast. So I'm just saying, like, this is just an advancement vehicle for me right now. You know,
this is V1.
So I'm gonna over dramatize. You know.
Do they add in the sound, the clapping, the roars from the crowds? Yeah. That's all you need.
There they are.
So we want to welcome very special guests, our colleagues here at Apply, Scott and Lauren. Hi, Scott and Lauren.
Hey, guys.
Or Lauren and Scott. I don't know if it's like you have a general team name that you go by, but we'll just call you the cool kids.
Scorin'.
Gorin. Ooh.
Wow, that's good. That's
Write
good.
that down.
Yep.
So Lauren, you gave us that amazing portmanteau there. Do you want to start us off and introduce yourself a little bit?
Sure. Well, thanks for having us. I'm responsible for all things strategy here at Apply, which can mean lots of things and it can mean nothing depending on who you ask. Strategy is a big word, but for us, it covers everything from kind of business strategy, experience strategy, tech and data strategy, marketing strategy, right? There's a whole lot of things that go into building at a comprehensive end-to-end digital transformation strategy. So that's kind of the role that I play. Been doing it for the last 17 years in the consulting agency space. So was at Accenture and Sapient and others before Apply, but work very closely with Scott.
Yeah, and I'm Scott Michaels. I'm the CTO of Apply, sort of newly minted in that. I guess I'm about 6 weeks in on that. Was the chief product officer for the prior 9 years to that. Was there for the start of Apply. And yeah, again, very similar. Have a long set of experience in building product and technology for a lot of really large brands. I was lucky enough to do a lot of things right at the start of the iPhone existing, and did work for the launch of the phone and the first apps and things like the first pushes and all of that. So I've just been in this for a long time and really love talking about it. I also sort of the AI technology leader for Apply as well, and talk a lot about that and use a lot of it myself day to day.
Were you also there for the Industrial Revolution?
No, that was after it. They needed that to make the phones.
Got it. Okay. I just wasn't sure how far back we're talking here. Well, why are we gathered here today? So normally our podcast is focused on marketing, MarTech, sometimes some things that are tangential. But now that we're part of Apply, everywhere you go, you hear AI. I think a lot of people still think it's a buzzword, but what we're finding is that a lot more companies are taking it seriously. And so the reason that we invited you on here is that, we have an increasing amount of clients and prospective clients that are asking like, okay, so my investors and my peers and my employees are saying that we need to do something with AI, but I don't know what that means or I understand what it means, but I don't know where to start. And you two being the purveyors and the leads of our AI service here at Apply, naturally, we wanted to have you here. So I think the first thing to start with is, Lauren, as we were just prepping for this, maybe you can take us along, or it might be Scott, it might be one of you, or either of you, or it might be Steven. Steven, pipe in if you want to. Try to keep it quiet, but as you're speaking with executives, customers, what are you finding is like what are the most frequent questions that people are asking, and where do you think it makes sense? Maybe it's a two-part question, but where do you think it makes the most sense for companies to start as they're starting in this AI readiness journey?
So yeah, I'll give you a bit more of maybe a macro perspective. I mean, Scott and we had a conversation with an audience of about 1,500 people a few months back. And, the thing we were talking about at that point was the fact that every single week, multiple headlines were rolling out with new updates, right, across different platform providers, different tool sets, different organizations, all AI related, and generally left almost everyone feeling super overwhelmed. So as individuals just existing in this world, but also as professionals trying to do our jobs and meet the expectations of the roles we're all in. And so we wanted to acknowledge that that is a very normal feeling because the pace of this is so astronomical, right? It's so fast that it is really difficult. Even when you're someone like Scott, who's been in this space, really in this space for many, many years, it's still very difficult to stay on top of it. And so I think one of the most important things, dare I say, go back to first principles, is really like, what is the core challenge that we're trying to solve? Because I think it's easy to get lost in where you should start with the technology or the enabler. But if you come back to, I have this challenge that I need to solve, and then you think about that in the context of your business, the users for whom that thing is for, whether they're employees, whether they're customers, and you gather data the way you would normally, you can start to understand how various aspects of this technology, of AI, can be applied to solve that problem in whole or in part, right? And so I think taking some of the pressure off, right? We're still solving business problems at the end of the day. And now we have another lens that we can apply to how we might solution, right? So that's just getting people to just take a deep breath and remember that, we've been in a similar place before and we got through that. So let's just scale it back a little bit and not get lost in all the jargon, all the tools and all the buzz. So that's sort of a higher order way to just kind of root people in something that they can grasp.
If you don't mind, Lauren, I just want to anchor this on, one of the big things you see in the headlines today and all across the board is, this business case that people seem to be solving for is profitability as opposed to pain. And that affiliation could be something along the lines of your job is going to get automated, white collar worker or whatever, person. And so you got to become AI literate so you don't get replaced. The person who's less AI literate than you will. Is the real business problem that most people are solving for, is it really just profitability? And they're like, hey, AI is the way we get more profitable because we can use less people. Does it come down to, in reality, is it like, well, realistically, maybe we can, lose 2 people. And that's like what AI will really, maybe it's 2 people's worth of efficiency. Is it really 50, 100, 200, 500? Like, I think that's the thing that kind of keeps people up at night is, if it seems like AI is just a pursuit of profitability, then, as a worker, what's that mean for me?
It's interesting because, again, maybe taking a bit of a bigger view, I think this has the potential to do what you've just described, right? I guess there's a world where in not very long from now, this technology could replace a lot of jobs. And sure, that companies could, in theory, become more profitable. But if people don't have jobs, then there's no one out in the market to actually purchase what it is you're selling, right? So supply and demand comes into play here. We can't really go as far as all jobs are wiped out and companies still win, right? There's a balance to strike. And also, as Scott can, talk about in far greater detail, while progress is happening quickly, there's still an important role for people to play in the equation, and there will be for some time. I had a friend recently put it to me like this. She runs her own AI company. She was part of the Alexa team originally. It often gets compared to the internet, right? We're in another age of, major transition like we were when the internet came on board. But she is actually like, let's think of it more like flight. We live in a world where you could automate flight entirely. You don't actually need humans sitting in the 2 front seats, right? But it doesn't seem so wise not to have humans in that equation when they are responsible for something so significant, right? There should be something there just in case. She believes AI will follow more of that trajectory where, yes, certain things that can be automated, should be automated, will be, but there's going to be a role for people, and there will be new roles that are born out of this new era that we're in for people to learn and adopt as well.
I really like that aligning it with like a pilot in a plane, because I think, definitely the one thing I don't want to be in is a plane that does not have a pilot. So,
Yeah, it's scary.
Scott, this is a question for you. I'll use a baseball reference. In the late 90s, the MLB started having teams embrace having a black uniform as one of their alternates. And at least the Mets refer to it as black for black's sake. Fans are still like divided over like whether they love it or not. So there's an element of like AI for AI's sake versus like actually bringing value. How do you navigate that? Like as an executive at a brand, you have this mandate to make use of it or to push it. How do you not just have it be some fluff? How do you ensure that it's going to be like, I have to do it, but how can I ensure that it's going to be meaningful, whatever it is that I end up doing?
Well, we have that conversation all the time. And, it goes back to how overwhelmed that executive is. Like I was on 3 calls in the last 3 days where they expressed to me, these executives at, various companies, that they get pitched it so hard every single day. And they are extremely worried that what they're seeing isn't real, because there's a lot of like marketing push against like some of these core platforms, and they won't deliver on that. And so like there's a flat distrust of what all the vendors are saying. So that makes it even more difficult. So like if you're trying to say, what am I going to do? But you can't trust what anybody is telling you, like you're kind of in a bad spot. And I think that's actually where most of the people we deal with are, because they're getting pitched so hard by their platform vendors, by their Marcom stack vendors, by just the big 3 in general, like the FANG companies. What seems to be out there is like just fantastical uses that are so crazy and amazing, but then you try and do it yourself and it doesn't work. And so like that's a real problem. So how do you actually solve for that is, well, we talk a lot about it. It's got to be show, not tell. You actually have to try it and do it and get really down to like, again, Lauren's point on what are the business outcomes for this? Because that's actually what's going to move the needle. You shouldn't do anything for AI's sake. It's going to measure it on, am I saving hours? Am I saving, let's just call it fatigue? Something I just do all the time, but it's not enjoyable. Maybe that's a good thing to get rid of, even if it doesn't save a ton of time, if it occupies a lot of brain space. And then there's ones that just eliminate hard costs, like ones where like you're able to say eliminate alternate photo shoots for different markets. For example, like things that are feasible to do today, like just eliminate hard costs, or get most of the way there by having it automate some of your SEO. And things like that. Like there are ways to do it very tactically. And I think that's where most people should start, because I think way too many people let the FANG company executives come in and pitch them on the fantastical, and that won't pay back for years. It may not even work, rather than, I would say, much more reasonable and achievable uses of AI within their org today.
And what is like, what's the fantasy that they're pitching, and where's the reality? Maybe you can kind of help, like, again, to Spencer's point, if I'm like one of these executives and I'm listening to this pitch, like, how do I know we're entering the realm of fantasy here, or how do I ground this back in reality?
I think for people that sell a product, for example, the idea that somehow super easily you can generate 1 million ad spots or stuff from your product and it's actually going to work, like with, like, say, almost no effort. I think that there's platforms that actually say that they can do that today, and that's just not true. It'll hallucinate against your brand unless it's done properly. And that takes real time and effort. So it is an achievable thing to do, but it takes, like, we're talking like something that takes like 6 months to a year to get right. It is not like a boxed product can go and do that today. I think that like people forget about the limitations on where these things can go. Like a good example is, let's say you're generating video, and for certain use cases, it's great. You can totally do it. None of that is at a high enough quality to be used for broadcast without a lot more effort and upsampling and things like that. And so like, it's just a good bar to be like, hey, I can use this for web and social. Do not consider using this for broadcast. And I don't even think like that basic line has been drawn for marketers at all in any of the stuff that I see today, where it's way too fantastical about what it could do for them, and like, oh, it's going to eliminate millions of hours of things. And it's not. It's going to actually get a lot of things done for you, but think of it much more in the production workflow or the tactics of these things, rather than the purely creative idea, for example, which is going to come from the people. But you can get to 20 potential ideas very fast at a high enough fidelity. We often say now it's, your high fidelity version is your new wireframe. Like you can just work at that level, and that is amazing to get teams to move faster and produce more quickly. But that doesn't mean that you're directly to market with what you just produced. And there's a line there that I think is very blurry right now. That's just false.
Like, let's say if the starting point here is generative content, your sort of suggestion here is the starting point there is a way to solve the inefficiency of passing direction back and forth to a creative team, or passing direction or anything along those lines, right? Where it's like, hey, me as a lifecycle marketer or as an executive, I have this idea. And instead of me giving you a bunch of boxes stacked on top of each other with some circles drawn in there and like, here's where images go and here's where these things go, right? Like I could just instead say, refine or write a prompt and refine the result to the point where it's close enough to what I'm saying. So it's like this, but like this instead, like maybe like a little bit of column A, a little bit of image B type of thing.
Yeah, I think you've got it. Like that still saves a ton of time. Like a ton of time in the production. And yes, like the team that receives that could use AI to produce the images. Like it's almost like a different workflow, but they also can now do it faster and get to the result faster. But you're not going to go from the idea generation person to the output in one step. Like I think there's too much of that being told that is what's possible right now, and it's not. You got to remember what people are motivated by. Like when we follow, like I would say pitches from, Google or Amazon or some of the big FANG companies that pitch to our same brands and say, our AI team will come here and do some things. I always look at it and go, what you're proposing is just going to burn a ton of Amazon credits or like compute credits, because actually that's what they're motivated by. They're not actually motivated by solving your use case, which is very different from, say, when Apply gets involved. We're trying to solve the use case, not expend a lot of Amazon credits exploring something.
We've talked a bit about how can a company use AI internally to create efficiency, generate ideas, things like that. But on the flip side is the consumer using AI to ask questions to find products. Some of the examples would be like that we had written down were, what's the best therapist for me nearby? What's the best bank for me based on, the X, and what garden hose should I buy? Things like that. And so that's not necessarily, it could be, but it's not necessarily a company using AI. It's a company contending with the consumer using AI. Traditionally, we use Google to search for things, or, Bing if you're, unhinged. But, if I go into Google search and use Google AI, I get usually a nonsensical mishmash of things. So maybe we'll ignore that. But like if I go into ChatGPT, for example, and I ask this question, how can brands ensure that they're in there? Because obviously that's very limited real estate. And if they're not in there, what can they do to work around that? So that's my question.
Sure. Maybe I'll start with that one, and then Lauren, go to you for more of the strategy, because it's actually both parts are really important. Tactically, this is almost very traditional work. So like that's what you're describing is called share of model, and referencing Bing is really interesting because it actually matters, believe it or not, in that world. Because like if you're on the Microsoft side of the fence, which is where OpenAI is, one of the things that feeds into that model is actually Bing's scraping. So there's a bunch of tactics, but I would say there's the traditional tactics to understand like what you're talking about is called share of model. Like what are the best noise canceling headphones for this Christmas present, etc. Like how do you even show up for that? There's the traditional stuff is like, where are these models indexing from? They're indexing Wikipedia. They're indexing, in the case of Microsoft, Bing, like what it has scraped. They all look at Reddit as a source of truth. Right. So like, it's almost like things that have nothing to do. Yeah. There's nothing that has anything to do with your site a lot. Like there's just like, remember, like your site is not the primary index for these things. It's actually the corpus that's out there. So having that more traditional presence in those other places and keeping that up to date is part of shared model. And we'll drop it in the show notes, but there is a new opportunity from specifically OpenAI publishing an endpoint. So you can upload your catalog and your product descriptions so that you can get indexed properly and essentially say, I'm here, index me like I'm here. And then tactically on your own site, it's like the very traditional SEO stuff, which is, like the robots.txt. There is a specific one for LLMs. So you got to make sure that you're enabling it so they can index you if that's what you want. If you're a content site, maybe you don't want them to because they're going to take it. But if you're like an e-commerce site, you certainly do want them to come and take a look at it. And there was this really wild move just last week by Cloudflare to put a gate in front of that. So by default, Cloudflare, which a lot of people use now for serving their sites, turned off AI indexing and added a feature which is, well, how much do you want to charge for an LLM to index your site? So if you're a content heavy site, like recipe site or something like that, like you may want to enable that. Although like right now, I'm kind of like, this is kind of scary to like be opted out. But if you're certainly selling things, you want all of that on without a fee because you just want to be discovered. Because those like Perplexity, ChatGPT, they're all making deals also with commerce engines. So there's going to be like a fast lane checkout that's coming for this Christmas buying season, which is, I want those noise canceling headphones. I've done my research in ChatGPT. And then there's going to be like, here's 4 retailers to buy it from right now. And if you don't show up there, you're going to completely miss that top of funnel purchase. So I think if you're today and if you're in marketing and you're essentially selling product, that's a pretty scary moment that's coming way faster than people think. But it's not that hard to tackle. It's actually just do what you're doing, but make sure you remember about like, where are these models indexing from? And it's not always from you.
Scott, just your point about like, here's the 4 things you can buy from, right? Like, how do you stand out in a list like that? Like, is it shipping? Is it brand, equity? Like, what is the, in this new Google of ChatGPT or Perplexity or Claude, right? Like, I can think of a couple of ideas, but, I'm thinking about that, response, Scott, where they're like, do they just list 4? Do they list 3? Like, are they charging are they getting an affiliate fee for each, purchase that eventually happens, right? Like how do you strategically set yourself up in a way that you're like not going to, one, you want to be there, but 2, you're not going to you're going to be competitive enough in a space that you have literally no control over.
Well, I guess like a really super short answer is that it's going to be such a small market at the beginning that getting any of that placement will guarantee some new top of funnel. And all of your competitors who didn't do it at all are going to get 0. So like, I think you're talking about like optimizing within that result. And I think for this Christmas, it's just going to be even in the consideration set is a win at the moment.
Okay. The interesting thing, just like thinking out loud on this, you might get those 4 options. And maybe if it's purely transactional, then you go for it. But for some of the, more involved purchases that people would make, it's going to extend beyond the 4, right? Like I still have an expectation around a brand understanding my needs, and the brands that actually are rooting their messaging and their product design and all of that in insight, they've historically been the ones that have won. I guess I'll just say that. I mean, there's lots of things that have pushed brands into other camps, but it's a really nice thing when a brand actually does understand you and can create something and deliver something that meets your needs, right? And I always think of Native. So Native was a brand that when they came online, like who would have thought you'd pay for deodorant to come to you via the mail? And it would be $50 and you'd be like, that's reasonable, right? You would never have said a decade ago that that's what you would do. And here I was, subscription, like I was on subscription for 3 deodorants, right? To come in the mail because I loved the brand purpose. I loved the quality of the product. There's more and more research out there talking about how dangerous it is to be applying certain things. So in any case, that's a good example of a brand that I think could do exactly what they were doing and who they were doing it for.
So is it safe to say you've got Native, Lauren?
It is safe to say.
Hey.
I'm a loyal, very organically loyal customer. But I guess where it is interesting because that will come back. People will not just accept what's served up because it's the top. They'll understand the mechanics of it, and they will still go looking for what meets their needs. So I'm also kind of curious. I don't have the answer, but just on this topic, how do we think that's going to play out, right?
Mm-hmm. I find one thing, and I do this personally, I don't know, what the actual behavior is of the general population using ChatGPT or Claude or anything, but I always like ask it the same question in a different way just to make sure I get the same result. Or I'm like, what are your sources on that? Or how can you validate this? Like I was doing some research here locally in Philadelphia. We have a bit of a strike on our local trash sanitation workers, right? And so I was asking it questions about things like, what are the scenarios of how this thing gets resolved and how long will it take? And, what is, all these different, like, what is considering crossing the picket line versus what is just reasonable for me to do in order to get my trash out of my house, right? And there was a lot of like interesting things. And once I got down to the sources, I was starting to understand like where the bias was coming from versus what was like, reasonable. And then I was able to like train the model a little bit to like kind of understand that. It wasn't like enough feedback for it to get really good at it. Giving all this because I trained the model to give me a result that I wanted, and I think in the same vein, when we're talking about product research and whatnot, right? Like if it's pulling all this stuff from Reddit, which I'm sure most people now go to for product validation outside of like in a reviews section of a page, right? I know I go to Reddit literally for everything for validation, external validation, even if it's like not actually great. There is like a strong validation piece there. Like, is there a world where like ChatGPT or Perplexity is literally like pulling up a screenshot of a quote of somebody from Reddit and is like, look, this is trustworthy. Like how does it give you trust when there's so much news out there about these models being too well trained by you that they're misleading you in some ways?
I mean, I think that goes even beyond like some of the stuff we're talking about here. It's like, because your average user is not going to be, not throwing any shade on them, but they're not going to be so savvy that they're actually going to train the model. They're just going to, at least at this stage, maybe 10 years from now, everybody will become savvy. But I feel like what will happen is just that the interface that people interact with will just become more savvy on its own. Having to train it will be done by somebody behind the scenes, or it'll do itself maybe. Because
it's quite easy though for people to say, to add to their search, like just more practical of someone like, again, like buying goods, they could say, and rank these by the perceived ethics of these companies when I buy. It lowers this bar to doing all of that research so that like you can say, oh, here's the 4 places I can buy it from. And they're somehow ranked by ethics. And like, they may not go any deeper than that because now they got to move on to the next task. I think that in general, this kind of like hit and run kind of shopping things, that's what's going to get eaten up here instead. Like you say, going back to the start of this conversation, it's about like replacing the Google search. Like it's these quick hit and runs where people can add more context like that. And then they're going to do their task and move on. And just like a hotel, booking direct is better than booking off an aggregator. You might see it there and then say, oh, yes. And now I'm going to go to the site and buy it there because like I have these other added benefits of my account and things like that. And then there's other ones, like depending on what the purchase is, like if it's something really banal, they're just going to be like, yeah, execute, like just execute this and get it done. I got other things to do. But that'll be everyone's like choice as they go through. I think like the hotel one's a good example of like where you would go direct because there's a lot of benefits to going direct versus an aggregator, especially if something goes wrong. And it's the same like that, I would say, with higher value purchases across the board.
We have a few minutes left here. Would you each mind giving us like a takeaway for like a chief digital officer, CMO, somebody who's trying to tackle this stuff? They know that they need to do it, but they're not sure where. They just don't want to get left behind. And they want to make sure they're, like they know they need to stay ahead of their game. Would you mind each sharing like a little bit of advice that someone can take away from this, for kind of as we look towards the next year and a half?
I'm happy to start. I mean, aside from just identifying some of your core problem areas, things you want to solve, we were talking about this yesterday too, but something we've been helping clients with is just start building out your 6, 12, 18, 24 months view, right? And you can include some of, what is it that you have on offer today? And where do you think, whether it's an internal or external facing, where do you want to start to try applying AI? And then how over 6, 12, 18, 24 months do we think that's going to shift the balance of, your business or the way your employees will work, how things will be governed, how your customers, you can just start to chunk it out and start to model a couple of scenarios, right? I think it always helps me anyway, just kind of get things out of brain onto paper and start mapping it out, just visually representing that. And then tied to that, what do we expect the cost to be? What do we expect revenues to be? And what do we expect the change in resources to look like? And it could be a shifting of skill sets, right? Adding new skill sets, training people to do new things. It could be decreasing, declining. It could be increasing. But I think going through that exercise and just having a few key swim lanes to kind of track against helps you start to understand more practically, again, what this is actually, what this could look like, how this could start to unfold. Bit of a sense of calm comes with that.
I would say first of all, look internally before you look direct to consumer. Look internally what you can do to help your own staff, get out of the drudgery aspects. When Lauren and I spoke a few months ago at that conference, it was just about getting time back. That is a great next quarter initiative. How can you just give time back to yourself or your employees? And by removing things that are, let's call it menial or don't actually take any of the really power of your people, and just giving them time back to work on client facing things. You're not doing client facing things with AI, but you're giving yourself the time back to do it is going to be the most effective in the 30, 60 day time frame. And just tactically, if people are tuning in and wondering about that, how do I show up in ChatGPT and all of those things? It is strange to talk about that if people haven't even tried it. So it is behave like a consumer, try it. How do you show up as a brand today? And if you find that you don't show up at all, then you've got work to do. You may find that you show up pretty well because you've done foundational work already. And maybe just taking the load off that you're at least in the mix could make your heart feel better today. But if you're not showing up at all, then you have work to do. And so that could just be on the list of initiatives, just tactically, just doing it yourself to see where you stand and giving yourself a little scorecard of how you're doing.
Might be a good plug for the Playbook, because the Playbook was something that we also shared at that same conference, which was just a free toolkit basically for people to start to practice using different types of tools for themselves, with their teams. So if you haven't gotten started, it's a nice way to start to kind of just become more familiar.
Okay, we'll include a link to that.
Great.
And then, Stephen, do you have a takeaway maybe on the either general or marketing lens?
Yeah, I think on the marketing lens, I think one thing to sort of keep in mind is, as a marketer, as a marketing executive, there is a threshold for which this stuff becomes viable for you. Aside from the sort of ChatGPT showing up in results thing, right? We're talking about, doing personalization at this kind of scale, or we're talking about doing some type of agentic marketing. It A, needs a lot of stuff to do it. B, needs a lot of users, data, and behavioral points. And so there's a lot of preparatory work you can do just to get that stuff off the ground. But generally, what I would suggest is anybody looking at agentic marketing, your qualifiers are do you have at least 500,000 people you could potentially market to that you have, contact information on, and do you have at least 100 assets that you would send them, right? Because it just needs a volume of scale in order to do things like optimization. And so some brands may hear that and be well, I'm not there yet. I need to just focus on growing my audience, or I need to just focus on kind of the basics. And when I get to this problem where the more effort I put into it, the harder it becomes to optimize, right? Because the thing just gets larger and larger. That's a pretty clear case of where AI could be a solution, right? So the problem might be is if the problem's not quite at the point where you can't solve it with just people, then there's sort of a natural graduation into AI. And some of the things that, Scott and Lauren are talking about around processes and things like that, that's just people working, right? There's always going to be ways that we can be more efficient. And there's a point at which, doesn't matter how much more AI you put behind it, it's not going to get any more efficient, right? At least for the near term. And so I think it's just kind of being reflective on that of all these buzzwordy things I'm going after. Am I even qualified for it? And if I'm not, what are the steps I should take to get to that point where these become reasonable for me to go after?
My stilted brain does not have to put together 3 takeaways because you did it for me. Thank you. So this is great. I know we're out of time, but I really, really appreciate it. And we will propagate this out to the world. And we'll include some links in the show notes. And until next time.
Awesome. Thanks so much, guys.
Apply. What's our portmanteau for Ragnarok Apply?
Ragnarok Apply?
Ragnaply.
There we go.
Ragnaply.
Dragonfly.
Love
I
it.
like it.
Thanks for joining us, Scorin.
Thank you. Thanks for having us here.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.